All right, everybody, welcome in. Happy Tuesday. We are talking NBA. There are 3 games on the slate tonight. This is the Slate DraftKings program. We air during the 5 p.m. Eastern time hour. We will take you up until 5:55 tonight. We do have Matt and Sims after us here on the DraftKings YouTube and Twitch platforms. We are also live on Twitter. We have Chirag Hira joining us. He is a DraftKings content specialist. So is Matt Mieselman. Great to have both of you here. Chirag, how you been? How you feel about your Lakers right now?
Why did you have to start with that right away?
Because
why
it's
do
the
you have
most
to start
fiery
with that?
topic we're going to have for the next 45 minutes, so got to get there now. Let's not bury the
All
lead.
right, if we're going there right now, I am super excited for the Lakers because LeBron is coming back, and he's going to come back in Boston, and I'm probably going to go watch that game.
Oh, they're going to break your heart. I think they're going to break your
They
heart.
already did. Last year, oh my God. I don't even want to talk about what happened last year. My buddy came in from LA. We had this whole entire week trip planned, doing a whole entire Boston trip and capping it off right before the pandemic. It was like the perfect thing, but the Lakers ended up losing that game by 30 points in the second quarter, and we sat there and just took it in.
So if you haven't been able to tell already, Chirag is a big Lakers fan. He's a Lakers supporter. We'll try to figure out the Lakers and really give Chirag therapy during this session tonight. Matt Mieselman did bring something about the Lakers to our attention about making the postseason, which you can find on the DraftKings Sportsbook. We can get to that. Mieselman, what are your thoughts to this point of the season? It's a good time to talk NBA. I know there's only 3 games tonight, but we're exactly 1 month into the season. The 3 of us were together 1 month ago now, and we're looking at the futures odds, and we'll get into more futures stuff as the show goes on. We will discuss the 3-game slate, but we're looking at the Golden State Warriors like, we don't know the status of Klay Thompson just yet. We don't know when he will be back. He will be back. We just don't know when. James Wiseman is also out, and they're the 4th favorite to win the title. And what do you know? They have the best record in the NBA, Mieselman, and they're playing tonight against the Nets in Brooklyn.
Yeah, so before I rattle off a bunch of stuff for the next 40 minutes about how right I think I am about everything, I'll at least outline where I've been very wrong to this point in the season. I didn't think the Warriors were going to be this good. I didn't think the Chicago Bulls were going to be this good. They're actually winning without Nikola Vucevic, too. I definitely was wrong about them. I thought they'd be closer to an average team. And then I think I have to say I was wrong about the Lakers also because they're actually just a lot worse than I thought they would be. I knew the Lakers would struggle, but I didn't think it would be this bad. They've lost to the Thunder twice already this season. So I can't really even claim victory on that one because it's just been so bad for them. They're 8-7 against one of, I think, maybe the easiest schedule in the NBA. Now, granted, LeBron's been hurt, but still, I mean, they've underachieved even the expectations they would have without LeBron. But I do think we have to talk about the Warriors also, especially because they're playing tonight. It's a big game against the Nets. And the Warriors have had a really good start. I think part of it has been a little bit of an easy schedule. Part of it is they've been healthy, at least relative to what they were supposed to have coming into the year. We weren't expecting Klay back this early. We weren't expecting James Wiseman back, who honestly, I think they're better off without him at this point in his career. He doesn't really know how to play defense yet. He's very young. I mean, at some point, he may become a very good player. But Kevon Looney is fine for them. They can play Draymond Green at center. They don't need him right now. But to me, the Warriors still aren't the best team in the NBA. The Phoenix Suns are right there with them in the standings, and they've been playing without DeAndre Ayton, who I think we actually all agreed a month ago was the Suns' best player, or at least their most important player because they just don't have depth behind him. So we can say JaVale McGee is good enough. They don't need DeAndre Ayton. That doesn't make sense to me. I think the Suns, when healthy, are the best team in the NBA, with the exception of one possible other team who's been playing really well recently, and that's the LA Clippers once they get healthy. So to me, I think we have to slow down a little on the Warriors because the hot start I don't think is going to last once all these other teams around them get healthier, including the Lakers too, but I'm focused more here on the Suns and Clippers. I think the Warriors are a very good team. They're still going to be fighting an uphill battle against some of these other teams in the West.
From a big picture standpoint, right, a big theme of the year, something that I learned from both of you. I've learned this from just following the NBA, but trying to learn NBA betting and NBA DFS as I go along. The staggering under numbers so far this year, that's a reflection of some rule changes, a reflection of how officials are calling games now. Unders are hitting at 62% of the time now in the NBA, or just over 60%. That was a stat as of 6 days ago. But what have you both made of what has now been more defense, let more no calls, letting more go by. And stars like Lillard and Harden, to use two examples, their free throw rates, their free throw attempts per game are, for Lillard, it's the worst of his career right now at 3.2 per game. James Harden, his lowest since his sophomore campaign at 5.4. Like, what have we made of the league so far as a consumer of the league? Chirag, I know you've done some betting streams as well. What have you made of the league so far, 1 month in?
Well, it's a little bit difficult to just make an assumption that many things have changed. The biggest change that a lot of people haven't really discussed is there's been a new ball. So there's an adjustment. I don't know if you can remember, about 10 years ago. So the league changed basketballs, and now they have a different ball that the players are getting a bit used to. Yes, some of the players in the Olympics already were playing with a different ball because of the FIBA rules. And I just think that plays a part into it as well. But what's really important is teams do struggle a little bit to get going, get initiated, get kind of going through that first part of the season. And I just feel like the games have been so competitive. There's so much depth across the league that there's actually good defensive schemes, and coaches are learning how to defend the three-point ball. I did an NBA bet stream with Chris Rebon and Matt Moore of Action Network the other night with the Hornets and Knicks. Both teams towards the top of the league in three-point shooting. And there was adjustments in that game to take each other off the three-point line. So if you're expecting high three-point shooting or a high three-point conversion rate, that sets up for a scenario where the numbers are going to be inflated because you're expecting more. But also, that's a lower efficiency shot in the general context of it. If you're taking a three or you're taking a layup or a dunk, it's a lower efficiency shot. So it's not going in 50% of the time. So you're going in maybe 30% time. There's long rebounds and different things that end up happening. So I just think that the game has changed and teams and coaches have adjusted a bit. And that free throw situation, I'm happy about it. I think it's great to keep the game clean, and you shouldn't have this inflated number due to free throws. I think that sets up for where players should be able to get into their bag and cross someone over, get to the line because they were fouled, creating action rather than creating a foul.
Right. Actually, with purpose, go to the basket to lay the ball in, not draw the whistle necessarily, which I hear you on that. Mieselman, you have a thought on that? Just the under rate so far this year, and then also something that stood out is the lack of free throws attempted by some of these star players.
So I didn't even know about the thing with the new basketball. Chirag is just enlightening me on something that was entirely like out of my, I don't know, just relevant area of consideration. So that is interesting. I do think that we should expect whether the players get fully adjusted to the new ball. Maybe they have already. It's kind of hard to tell sometimes with a small sample size. Even as players get adjusted to the new rules too, we should see lower scoring just because there's less fouls. But I don't think we should see the under trend continue because, to me, at least what I'm seeing from like the typical over-unders for these games, the lines have already adjusted. Like I think the opportunity was there if you were smart enough or I guess savvy enough to be paying attention to that kind of thing at the very beginning of the season, the first couple of weeks. That kind of went over my head also. But at this point, I think like the totals for all the games have dropped. I think from this point forward, we probably just see like 50% overs and 50% unders like we're used to seeing throughout a whole season. As far as how players are going to adjust though, like that can be kind of case by case. Like James Harden, I think everyone has been talking about as the player that is most affected. But he's had some better games recently. I would imagine like the problem is that he was trying to draw fouls in situations where he wasn't getting the calls, and going forward, maybe he just stops trying to do that and just does. James Harden has 17 different ways to score. Like he doesn't need to draw silly fouls on the perimeter to get his points. He can score in any number of ways because he's probably one of the top three, at least top five scorers in all of basketball. He'll just do other stuff. Like, I don't think he's going to not be good going forward or anything like that. So I'm not especially worried about this. I think less foul calls does mean less scoring in general, but it's also like, it's a few possessions a game. Like most possessions do not involve a guy pump faking at the 3-point line and then jumping into a defender. That's something you see happen like once or twice a quarter in prior seasons. Now you just won't have those plays. So like, I don't think that fundamentally the game has changed. I just think that these outlier weird plays that happen once in a while. We just don't have those anymore.
Chirag, so you mentioned how you watch a game the other night, like the Knicks and the Hornets, and you're impressed with how they guarded the 3-point line. There were adjustments made in game. We do have a game tonight, one of the three, featuring Golden State and Brooklyn, two of the top 5 rather, 3-point shooting teams in the league 1 month into the season. So I ask you, is that maybe that's not a factor tonight? Two teams that do shoot the 3 ball really well, unless they get up for this game and play better defensively. What's your read on this ball game tonight? And just from an injury standpoint, as it pertains to this game, we'll get to other injuries. There are guys out on the later games tonight, but for this game, Gary Payton, the second, is probable, and that's just about it. And pardon me, the Nets have a couple guys out. Claxton, Harris, Millsap are all out. What do you make of this one, though, Chirag, with all the shooting on both sides, Warriors and Nets?
Well, that's the thing. So you have two teams that are able to score the basket from beyond the arc, and even if they do make adjustments, their adjustments are unlikely to be focused. You're obviously going to try to take Steph out of the matchup, but are you going to commit to putting it on kind of on video to say, all right, this is kind of the play that we're going with it? No, you're going to run your normal defense, and the adjustments are more going to be, I would say, just the way the rotations are. So Paddy Mills is going to have a large impact in this game, or he should at least have a healthy amount of minutes due to the Joe Harris being out. But that sets up, what is Paddy Mills' greatest strength? That's shooting the 3 ball. So I don't believe that the Warriors are going to come out and say, we need to take away the 3 ball or anything like that. I think it just depends on a case-by-case basis. When you could say that, for example, when you have players of caliber of Kevin Durant, Steph Curry, James Harden, who are elite 3-point shooters that are over the top, you could consider elite 3-point shooters, whereas the Knicks and Hornets, LaMelo is a really good 3-point shooter on their team, by their team, and they shoot a lot of threes, but they don't have anyone that you're going to go and say, this is a knockdown guy. I'm going to count on him day by day, night by night, whatever he's playing. And the Knicks, in that same vein, they don't have an elite 3-point specialist. So I think the difference is kind of there, where it depends on the matchup. And in this matchup, you can't really take away Steph. Are you going to try to take him away? Sure, you can. But then you're losing your entire defense because of the gravity that he pulls to it and the ability to pass out of the double teams or out of the traps.
What kind of game are we expecting tonight, Mieselman? This is the game of the night, Warriors and Nets. From a shooting standpoint, what direction do you want to head in discussing this game?
Yeah, so after the football game from last night and after the run of sports that it seems like we've been on recently, like I'm hesitant to pick any specific outcome because there's just a lot of variance sometimes, or I mean, really all the time, and you never really know what's going to happen.
Yep.
So I would say like this game probably stays close, but also it might not. Like it's hard to pin down what will happen here. I do think the Nets are the rightful favorites. I do think that this is maybe right. Although I don't know, this game has the highest total by a small amount over these other two games. I'm not sure if that's accurate. Joe Harris is out. We don't know exactly what kind of impact that has in terms of rotations. I actually think that just about everything tonight will hinge on Paddy Mills. I'm glad Chirag brought him up, and especially for DFS. So just sportsbook angle quickly, if Mills is making his threes, you see him play more minutes, and then you see a higher game because he's also not someone who plays a ton of defense. And he can shoot probably better than, I don't know, most spot-up shooters in the NBA, really. I mean, he's very good at that. But if Mills is struggling, then you see like Javon Carter and DeAndre Bembry playing, who are not shooters. Those guys are defense-first players, are not going to do the same stuff that Mills does. And then Bruce Brown, too. Like the Nets don't have another shooter. They probably just go away from that being their approach if Mills isn't playing well. So, you know, like Paddy Mills could be the thing that dictates whether this game goes over or under the total, just based on how much he's on the court. And then for DFS, like I think there's a chance he's the highest owned player on the whole slate. So that's a whole other conversation. Because with Harris out, and I think Harris is really like the only surprise news we have. Like there's no other value. This slate has almost no value unless like we get some injury update, which always seems to happen. But assuming there's no news that breaks from here on out, like Mills is the chalk value play. And if you look at his game log, I mean, he put up 9 threes and 38.5 fantasy points last time out. The game before that, he had 3 fantasy points in almost the same, like he played 25 minutes. Mills is entirely
against New Orleans.
Yeah, that wasn't a hard matchup. Obviously, the OKC matchup wasn't hard
None
either.
of them,
but
right? Orlando, Pelicans, Thunder. Those are three
yeah,
kind of layup games where he should get minutes and produce.
but the point here is like because he gets all his points shooting threes, if he makes them, he's going to do great. If he doesn't make them, he's going to do terribly because he's not contributing in any other areas. So it makes for some interesting decisions for tonight, both for betting and fantasy.
The Nets have not played in a ton of close games this year. I'm looking at some of their previous games. They had a 5-point win against the Sixers. They had a close win against Milwaukee, or a loss, pardon me, to Milwaukee earlier in the year. They haven't played a lot of close games to this point in the year. Warriors are coming off a loss, and you mentioned the over-under. When you combine these team records to the over, 9-18 in a 27-game sample, Golden State and the Nets to the over. Do we have more thoughts on this game tonight as it pertains to DFS? Do you lean James Harden over Kevin Durant, who is the correct? And like, I think it was Mieselman who mentioned Harden. He has been playing better as of late. We look at some of Harden's DK fantasy point outputs. He's been up over 50 in 4 of his last 5 games.
Yeah, I actually very strongly prefer Harden to Durant tonight. And it's not because I necessarily think he'll be much better. It's because of the positionality. So tonight is a very strong night for guards. Mills is going to be the chalk there. I think Curry will be decently popular. There's some Clippers guys who are probably a bit underpriced. Bruce Brown, increased role also a bit with Joe Harris out. And I think because of that, you see people pay down at guard. If they're paying up at guard, they're probably more inclined to play Curry. And at the forward position, there aren't really those plays. So I think people will just be able to more easily make a lineup they're comfortable with Durant. And on any given night, like Harden could put up 65 fantasy points or Durant could put up 65 fantasy points. I don't think it's a fruitful endeavor to try to pick which one you think will have a great game. I think it's just more about which makes sense from a tournament DFS perspective. And to me, Harden I think will be half the ownership of Durant. And it allows you to do things from like a full lineup perspective that make more sense to me. So I'm not saying fade Durant necessarily. I think there are ways that both of them are good enough, like maybe the other 2 games are blowouts or something. But if you have to pick one, I think Harden, of this big 3 from this first game, I think Harden's my favorite of the 3.
DraftKings is offering the $450K fadeaway tonight. That's the big contest in the DraftKings lobby. Chirag, where would you start for this 3-game slate? Do you look into this game because of that total? And it's not by much, as Matt said. It's not the highest total by much, but it is. Do you start here and try to build from here, stacking this game?
Kind of. So the way that I'd like to look at this slate is we have Ian Hartenstein that's been picking it up, but he's a very sporadic producer. So there's games where he has 40 fantasy points, and then there's games where he has 10 fantasy points. So he has a really relatively safe floor, I would say. At 3,500, you're not paying as much for him. So I try to think about it in a scenario of, okay, am I going to look at him at my center, or do I want to look at him as my flex play? So there's a bunch of differences in directions that you can go. So I like to build in a roster construction. So are we spending 2 expensive players, taking 2 cheap guys? What's the build with that? So I want to start as my value, picking up my value, putting all those guys in, and then deciding, okay, do I feel that there's a hole at my forwards, or do I feel there's a hole at guards? Can I spend up for 2? Does it make more sense to have the depth and only spend up for 1? So I think starting with the values first, then fleshing out the lineup is kind of the direction that I'm looking at.
Okay. Yeah, center's an interesting call tonight, right? Go ahead.
Hardenstein really put up 40 fantasy points. I saw it on the game log too. Like Chirag didn't make that up. It was like, when did that happen?
Just a couple nights ago against the Timberwolves. Zubac was, I think, in foul trouble against Cat, so he got a bunch of more minutes.
He also gets garbage time minutes, so that's like a point in his favor too if the Clippers end up winning by a lot. The decisions at the cheaper end of the salary range are definitely interesting, and the center decision overall is interesting because I think
I was just going to mention that injuries, at that position. Yeah,
so it's like a bit of a weird slate, and like, will Hartenstein be more owned than Zubac? Like, I think that is somewhat likely. I do think most people will pay for Gobert. Drummond's price finally is like normal because there was a while where he was like 4 and 5K, and it's like, well, I have to use a spot on Drummond tonight because he's guaranteed to kill me if I don't play him. Like, he was probably half the cost of what he was supposed to be. Now at least it's a decision at 8,700. But to me, like, I think the pivot point that is most relevant is what, like, you probably do want to play a few cheap players. There isn't that much that's that appealing in the mid range. So like ordinarily I would say like the field's going stars and scrubs, just use a balanced lineup and that's like your leverage. I don't think that makes a ton of sense because there just really aren't that many players in the mid range that are all that appealing. And I do think you can just build a different stars and scrubs lineup than everyone else. So like if the field's playing Curry, Mills, Durant, Hartenstein, let's say, you can play Harden, Tobias Harris, Doug McDermott, and Lonnie Walker. Like I think something like that is you can get very, very sufficiently unique with your lineup just using different players at those price points. And I do think like Paddy Mills is not that much better of a play tonight than Doug McDermott, yet the ownership on him is going to be way higher because like he's coming off this monster game. Joe Harris is out. It just kind of makes sense. Yep. Last thing I want to say on the Clippers Spurs though, in regards to value plays is there's this dynamic where when the Clippers are trailing in games, they don't play their centers. And we saw this in last year's playoffs. So like, I usually don't have this kind of specific basketball analysis type of insight, but because the Clippers have such a similar team to last year, Kawhi's out, but they're playing Bledsoe basically in Kawhi's spot. And they did this throughout the playoffs. Anytime they were down like 10 or 15 points in the second half, they'll just play Nick Batum at center. Like they don't need to have a center on the court. And they go with the small ball lineup. They try to shoot threes. We saw Zubac in a game they beat the Thunder a couple weeks ago, only play 13 minutes with no foul trouble just because they were down a bunch. They ended up coming back to win. So yeah, I think if you scroll down a little bit, they were losing by I think 18 points or something like that at halftime, and then they used Luke Kennard, Nick Batum to come back in the second half. So I'm not going to predict that the Spurs are beating the Clippers in the second half, but if that situation does happen, you could see both teams playing small, and then someone like Thaddeus Young is appealing. Batum is more appealing. Luke Kennard gets more minutes, maybe Terrence Mann. So, like, that's not the craziest circumstance in the world. It's not like the Clippers are huge favorites tonight. I think there's a lot of ways that a bunch of different cheap players could be good. Like, these aren't just, guys who are going to play 11 minutes and we're just hoping they get hot and maybe like there's a blowout and you get garbage time. There's a bunch of cheap players on all of these teams that are actually playing real rotation minutes. And to just say, well, Mills seems like the better play, I'll just use him, I think it's the wrong move. Like, to me, if Paddy Mills is 40+% owned, I'm not going to play him in any lineups, and I'll just like pick someone else and hope that he doesn't make 9 threes again.
As it pertains to the Clippers, Terrence Mann is the one key player as far as rotational player that is questionable. Oh, there goes a ring light. Sorry. He is questionable for tonight's game. And that's a good point, too, because typically you see a starting center go out. So Pottle's out tonight for the Spurs. Evan Embiid is out tonight. We talked about Wiseman being out for Golden State. I guess you don't necessarily have to go right to the backup center, right? You could go to the small forward, power forward role where these teams do want to space the floor and give opportunities to a Nick Batum or a Terrence Mann, for instance, to not just fall into the trap of, okay, starting center's out, who's the next guy? Let's go to Drummond. Let's go to Zubac tonight. Who's the backup center for the Spurs that has any?
Drew Eubanks. He's really he's a possible play to consider too at 4,400.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, for sure. It's not that I dislike him necessarily, but yes, to that point, like you can consider much more than just him because they're missing their starter. Like Eubanks, I think, is in play, but then also like McDermott could play more minutes, or Thaddeus, or whoever else.
Yep.
All right. And then of course, with Philadelphia, with I think we found out too with Philly. I mean, their wing depth is pretty solid. As you mentioned, Tobias Harris, Maxey, also in the backcourt, Maxey and Milton. Those are fun little plays. Now their prices have gone up. They're not cheap anymore. So that's something that's also changed, Mieselman, right? And I think the Philadelphia 76ers with the Embiid, Thibault COVID news, that's finally reflected. The prices.
So they're overpriced for sure, but I do think that there are viable routes to game stacking one of these two later games. And that's interesting on Terrence Mann too. Like if he gets ruled out, that does open up more minutes for some Clippers guys. But I think like most of the field is going to do some form of game stack of this early game. And I think like you could play for a scenario where maybe the Nets just win by a lot. Like basketball is weird. Sports are weird. Sometimes blowouts happen when you don't expect. And then no one in the Nets Warriors game is good. And then these other two games, both have point spreads that one's 7.5, one's 10. Like we may get 2 blowouts out of these 3 games, and you just game stack the other one. Like the scenario where you want Tobias Harris and Andre Drummond and Tyrese Maxey and Rudy Gobert and Donovan Mitchell, like the whole thing is the one where both other games are blowouts. So if you're in a large field tournament, like I think it's certainly viable to just say, I'm going to play 6 or more of my players from one of these 2 West Coast games and just hope that that's the only one that stays close.
Yep.
The irony is we're getting all this news about tomorrow's slate. I'm getting updates from DK Nation right now. Bradley Beal, Luka Doncic, Jimmy Butler, and Bam Adebayo. They're questionable for tomorrow. So
Mavericks really should have waited on that Luka news. They ruined a lot of potential value by they put that out before any betting lines were up. It was just very unfair of them.
Yeah, he's going to miss. Yeah, he's out. Mark Stein with the report. So the Mavs didn't put it out. Mark Stein did, technically, unless the Mavs have followed up. Yeah. All right. What do we? So we started the show, Mieselman, by giving Chirag a little bit of a hard time about the Lakers. What do you say we dive into some futures? Because as we mentioned, the season is 1 month in. The season started 4 weeks ago today. The LA Lakers are 8-7, and Mieselman could not wait to share this staggering number as it pertains to the Lakers. The Lakers to make the playoffs. No. At plus 750. Chirag, here are your thoughts.
I mean, it makes sense the way that the Lakers have been playing, but it's the bet on no, and we have a play-in tournament that can get them in there, and LeBron coming back. I just think that it's a little early to just completely write them off. Injuries could still happen on other teams. There's a long season to go. And just to say no, sure. Have they been playing terribly? Yes. Has it been fun to watch as a Lakers fan? No. But am I going to just write them off completely? Kind of, but they're on the edge there. And LeBron's coming back, stabilizing this team is going to be a bigger deal than a lot it's being made of. And if he ends up getting injured again, go hit the line and go attack it. But I don't think that there's an option here where LeBron's going to just come in and say, all right, we're going to get just completely dominated again. No, he's right. He's coming back to right the ship.
Let me say this too, and to back Chirag here, Mieselman, and please weigh in. Tell me if you agree or disagree.
After, yeah. Let's defend Chirag first.
I don't think this roster is going to be the same in February. It's going to be shaken up. I think this roster reeks, huh?
But how? Who's getting moved? They're all on 1 year deals.
I know they're bad contracts. I know, but
they'll sign Derek Favors after the Thunder cut him. But there's not much they can do.
He has to do something. Like, they have to do something to mix it up. And I have confidence that I thought how are the Cavs the final year LeBron was there? How did they figure out a way to get George Hill, Kyle Korver, and make that whole thing work? They're going to shake this up. I think he's got
a good trade proposal for the Lakers. They should trade Russell Westbrook to the Wizards for Kyle Kuzma. I think that might.
I love Kyle Kuzma. He's been balling this year.
Okay, but you know something? That's the second guess. They move those players. So Harrell, KCP, Kuzma.
Yeah.
They didn't make the right deal. It feels like they could have gotten someone better than Russell Westbrook. Maybe with.
You have to keep in mind when that deal happened. There was a lot of people that said that the Wizards are the ones that ended up losing that deal because of what Westbrook brought to the table for that team, how he helped them, invigorated them, carried to the playoffs. Like, there was a lot of intangibles that Russell Westbrook brought to the team because all they had to do was pass to Bradley Beal, who's going to knock it down and lead the league in scoring, or take it himself. In this scenario, it's a totally different lineup. They're totally different team where he's sure, he's able to lead, but he's not the guy, whereas Bradley Beal is okay with being kind of a quiet guy and just leading the league in scoring.
All right, Mieselman, let's stop defending him. Why is this happening? Why are the Lakers missing the playoffs?
I mean, so first of all, like, LeBron and Anthony Davis are great players, but I think for both of them, actually, their time as like true MVP contenders is past. Like, if you made a list right now, and granted, I'm someone who thinks that there's a strong case for LeBron as the greatest player in NBA history, like above Michael Jordan. So just keep that in mind. I am one of those. And having said that, I don't think LeBron's a top 5 player in the league anymore. I don't think Anthony Davis is maybe he's borderline top 10. Like I think LeBron's in the 5 to 10 range and Davis might be a step below because you have like Jokic and Doncic and Curry and Giannis. Like I think there's a better tier and LeBron is tier 2 and Davis is tier 2 or 3. So like they're not dealing with the same level of high level players that they used to have. LeBron in his prime is a different thing than LeBron at 36 years old. He's still great, but he's not as great. So that's where I'm starting. And then I think Westbrook is a net negative on an NBA team. And I think most of the rest of the Lakers are worse than him. Like Carmelo Anthony does not play defense at all. Zero. He's not interested.
That's been a great story. Scoring though. It's been a great story. But
he's an above average offensive player, but he's such a net negative overall because I think he plays worse defense than any single rotation player in the whole league. Like I don't think that's a stretch. He's slightly positive at offense and he's horrendously negative on defense. So like the overall package is not good. And then like guys who used to be competent players like Rajon Rondo and DeAndre Jordan and Dwight Howard, like none of these guys are good anymore. So yes, maybe Trevor Ariza comes back and helps. I think Talen Horton-Tucker is okay. Like that does matter. And Ariza is probably better than all the guys I just mentioned. So like I think that will help. But the problem is they're already 8-7 against the league's easiest schedule or something approximating that. They're in a division where they have to face the Warriors and Suns a bunch of times. The Clippers are going to get Kawhi back at some point, probably 2-3 months from now. Okay, so maybe that's a point of disagreement on when Kawhi will be back. I think like somewhere in the next 10 to 15 weeks. I think we probably could agree though that if those two teams matched up in a play-in game, the Clippers with Kawhi are substantial favorites over the Lakers with their fully healthy team. And like that's a possible scenario because the Clippers I think are good without Kawhi, but they're not so good that they necessarily make it into the top 6. Like they may be a 7 or 8 seed. So the other point is that like the Lakers have LeBron and Anthony Davis, who have both dealt with a ton of injuries. And like, what are the odds that they both, like even when LeBron comes back, they're both just going to stay healthy the rest of the year? And like this, I think is the most relevant point here where, yes, if LeBron and Davis miss a combined 5 games the rest of the year, the Lakers probably wind up in the top 6 seeds in the Western Conference. But the chances of that happening to me are just so low. Like there's going to be another injury at some point to one of them that knocks them out. Maybe not for the year, but like they're going to miss a week or 2 here and there, probably multiple stints. The Lakers are playing to win a championship, not to avoid a play-in game. And we saw this last year where like they were content to just be the 7 seed rather than like push these guys extra minutes at the end of the year because like they figured we'll just win the play-in game. And maybe that's what happens. But they could also they could find themselves facing a pretty good Grizzlies team, a good Blazers team, a good Clippers team with Kawhi potentially in a play-in scenario and just lose there. So it's not like I think the Lakers are dead or anything. It's that I think the most likely scenario is they're going to be between the 7 or 10 seed with LeBron and Davis missing a handful of games each. And they're going to be facing some tough teams and they're going to have to do well. Like it could come down to a coin flip. Like I really think that plus 750, the real line there, like maybe they should be slight favorites to the yes to make the playoffs, but like no is at least 40% in my mind. And at plus 750, that's just a crazy disparity. And again, like the Lakers could fix up their roster and win the championship from the 7 seed. If Davis doesn't get hurt against Phoenix last year, like that was on the table. So it's not like I'm ruling out their season, but a lot has to go right for them to comfortably make the playoffs.
Lakers are still the second favorite to win the title at plus 550, only behind Brooklyn. They still are in front of the Warriors. And to win the Western Conference, the Lakers are the favorite at plus 280, Warriors at plus 425. I look at the landscape in the Western Conference.
It's so disrespectful to the Suns, by the way, and then I'll let you continue. Like the Suns won the West last year, and their team is better. Like it just doesn't make sense.
Well, not only that, but I think that we have to take into account that the Lakers are a public team. So if you move the line to not being them the favorites, then you're going to get a different number and get a different amount of value. Whereas here, the people are going to bet the Lakers regardless. And why make the odds longer, make them shorter? And from a sports perspective, I think it just makes sense from that because of how public the Lakers are.
No, you're definitely right. They don't have to move.
Business decision. Like Chirag's right. Good job, Chirag. Chirag is looking out for the company. It's good. Phoenix Suns are the 7th favorite. Mieselman's Suns are plus 1,700 right now to win the NBA championship, and they are the 4th favorite in the Western Conference at plus 650. Only a game back of Golden State going into tonight's game. What if the Lakers called the Thunder and said, "Hey, we'll give you all of our stuff at the bottom of the roster. You can have Russell Westbrook back, and you give us SGA." That's the deal.
Way. No way. There's no way the Thunder would do that. There's no way.
I'm not even sure if the Thunder would answer the phone if the Lakers call. Like, they're probably just thinking we're not going to do anything good. Like,
and the only way that they would do it is if they said, "Here is a horrible contract and a first-round pick attached to it."
Give them 3 firsts. I mean, this is your team.
What do you mean? How many more picks can they give away? They've already given away so many picks for Anthony Davis.
Look at the Rams. Look what LA does. Look at the Rams. They just give away picks.
It is how LA does it. Yes, I love the super team scenarios. It's great and all, but after a certain point, like, there's nothing more to give back. And how are you going to say, "Oh, get SGA"? No, there's no way. He is the future. He is literally going to be a top 5 point guard in this league. How are you going to just give him away like that?
I'm trying to help your team, man. I'm trying to think of ways.
It's not happening. You can't give up something bigger than basketball. Like, if they could give them a lump sum payment of like $500 billion, like there's nothing within basketball that could get them to acquire a player like that. I mean, if they want to try to trade for Derek Favors, like, that's more reason. But like that, I think that's all they're capable of doing is getting like fringe role players. And also, Chirag knows how much I love this guy, but like, Nemanja Bjelica was available as like a veteran minimum, right? Like, the Warriors aren't paying him much. He's better than all the guys like Rondo and Melo, right? Like, why didn't they? I feel like they just didn't do. They didn't. Well, it's both true and not, because they got Trevor Ariza, who I thought made sense, but then the other guys they got, I don't think they did a good job. And Ariza wound up getting hurt, so like, that's a bit unlucky. But they could have done a lot better finding veteran minimum players. And instead of like DeAndre Jordan and Carmelo, like, really, this is who they picked.
Yeah, and the thing is, I believe that the Lakers are, in a sense, relying on the buyout market again. Last year, they picked up Andre Drummond off of it. He wasn't a fit, but there's always a chance that there's a disgruntled star that wants to go to LA on this buyout scenario. So I think that's what they keep hope for, because it's LA, and they built a team, in a sense, right now for LeBron. This team was like, okay, hey, here's your buddy in Melo. Here's another scenario where Westbrook's coming back to LA. It's a storybook narrative that they're building this team. They're not actually building the team with quality depth. Like, the year that they won the championship, it was because those pieces were put together correctly. You had McGee and Howard rotating those minutes. When the playoffs slowed down, they had to go small. AD slid over to the 5 against the Rockets and just demolished them. So it's just a way the pieces have to be put together. And they have three-point shooting. Wayne Ellington's a good three-point shooter. THT should come back and be able to knock it down. But if you're having Russell Westbrook take 5 to 7 threes a night, then you're setting up for long rebounds, fast breaks, and these guys don't get back on defense. So if you're going to have long shots.
You're saying LeBron doesn't have a future as an NBA GM coming? Like, he doesn't really have that skill set necessarily.
It's going to be it all depends on how this Adele relationship with Rich Paul ends up going, if how they're going to be able to handle it together, because I think he needs Rich Paul's a little influence in here to get some guys in the right moves.
We have a couple more minutes. We haven't even discussed the landscape in the East, and I think the East deserves the conversation, because 1 through 8 right now in the East, every team has at least 8 wins. We look at the Eastern Conference winner. We have 5 minutes to go. Thanks, producer Eamon. The Washington Wizards are 10-3, pacing the East, and they're plus 8,000 to win the conference. I know, like, I'm not saying I'd take the cheese on the Wizards, but throw $5 on that, man. I mean, what if Bradley Beal's got this cast bought in? He's coming back this week. Maybe Brad Beal was onto something. He wants to stay in Washington, and they look really good. And maybe if you want to think of something more secure, are we in on the Chicago Bulls, Mieselman? You doubted this basketball team.
I did.
Billy Donovan is your favorite to win Coach of the Year right now. They've been a great story. They've beat the Nets head-to-head this season. They've been right there toe-to-toe with Milwaukee. Also Philadelphia. They beat Boston on the road in comeback fashion. That's a good basketball team. They're plus 1,800 to win the conference.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think we have to acknowledge how just incredible it is to see the Wizards doing this well post Russell Westbrook trade. Like, you don't have it couldn't be more telling about just like the impact he has. But anyway, yeah, I think the Wizards, like their current roster is solid. These teams though, like the Bulls too, have benefited from injuries at the top. So like the Nets, I mean, I don't know when Kyrie Irving or if Kyrie Irving is coming back, but Irving with the Nets or a fully healthy Milwaukee team who's been playing a long stretch of games without Chris Middleton and Brook Lopez. To me, those are still the two best teams. And then I think Miami's right there with them. So like,
Yep.
And then if Philly somehow gets together, although like the odds that Embiid stays healthy and Ben Simmons comes back and plays well, like that still seems a bit slim. But I still think like the Bulls are in the next group still to me. And I think the Wizards are too. And maybe the Hawks and Celtics are down there with them because like we just haven't seen the full version of these top end teams. And I think that's why we have the records we have. So with the East, it's more of like a wait and see because I think we just haven't seen the best teams at their best yet. And once we do.
Okay, but as you say that,
Yeah.
we've come to find out in this league, we might never see their best version, right? I heard the same thing in this town in Boston. Oh, just wait until they're healthy. Never really happened.
Well, the Milwaukee
Brooklyn?
situation is different because those are both COVID, or Brook Lopez is, but Middleton was out for COVID protocols, and he will get him back. Lopez is, but yes, like I'm not going to say it's a foregone conclusion that Kyrie Irving is going to be back. Like I have no idea. So that is a fair point.
I'm just saying, like, I think we've run into this now at the NBA. Like, you do need a break. Something has to break your way. And that's what happened with Milwaukee against Brooklyn in their situation, or pardon me, when they got Atlanta in the conference finals. Brooklyn was a tough get in the semis, but something's got to break your way.
The Bulls could be like last year's Suns. Like there is a scenario for that where like the Suns weren't the best team in the NBA last year. They were probably top 5, but they just managed to not fall apart while everyone else fell apart. And I guess like the Bulls could have a similar run. I don't think they're quite as good as the Suns were last year, but they are a good team. And like maybe just no one up there gets fully healthy and the Bulls are able to make a run through the East because of that.
Chirag, do you want to get the last word in here on the East? What do you think?
I was a believer of the Bulls. I've been a huge fan of Lonzo since he corrected his form. I think he's understood that how he needs to play the ball is passing and shooting. Their additions have been super solid. Caruso's underrated. He's a great defender, and that him going off the Lakers is a bigger impact than they were expecting. And I have no issues with them. I just think that when you get to the playoffs, you're going to have you need the top end talent. And sure, these are all solid guys that have been all-stars in the past on the Bulls, but I don't know if they have it to get over the Nets or the Bucks. But I think the depth is there, and if there's an injury that happens on one of the teams we saw last year, Kyrie twisted his ankle, and if Kyrie's in this matchup and Harden's kind of working his way back, probably the Nets win. There's a toe that could go in the different direction of KD, who thought he hit a 3. So there's a lot of things that could break in the Bulls' direction, and I think their depth is what's going to help them have a chance to break it for them positively.
It's kind of a poor reflection of GM LeBron. Wizards have a bunch of old Lakers. The Bulls have a couple of former Lakers, and they're the top two teams.
Caruso would be a nice fit on the Lakers right now too. Someone who plays defense, that would be very, very. I mean, Caruso is awesome defensively. That would be very helpful.
All right, Chirag, we're going to work on a trade. We're going to come up with something. All right.
There's no trade, man. It's going to be on the buyout market. There's no trade.
All right. Fine. We'll wait. We'll have to wait till the buyout market. I think that's going to do it for us here tonight on the slate. Good luck with everyone with your lineups tonight. You've got 3 games on the slate: betting, DFS. Hopefully you find some value. We basically told you there really isn't any. So make careful decisions. Avoid the chalk at all costs, and make sure you pick the right studs. That's the advice we give you here. And a big picture look at the season, 4 weeks in. All right, for Chirag here, I'm Matt Mieselman, Branden Glasheen. Thanks to Andrew and Eamon behind the scenes. The slate returns tomorrow night in the 5 o'clock window until 6 o'clock-ish. You'll have Emerson, Reed, and Jeff, golf and NFL. Of course, the sweat is tomorrow on our Twitch, YouTube, as well as Twitter live stream. Be sure to join us then at 11 a.m. Eastern time. You all have a great rest of your Tuesday night.